I'm James Monroe. I am the senior producer of adult programs and theater experiences here at the museum, and it's my extreme honor to welcome you all to this really important evening of film and dialogue. We thank you for being here. And tonight is a collaboration with our friends from the Wellness Collaborative and the Roxbury International Film Festival. We were thrilled when they approached us with this invitation to partake in tonight and to open up our theater for this screening of this groundbreaking new documentary and this amazing conversation that's going to follow afterwards. And you're going to hear more about the film from those who created it in a few moments, and you're also going to hear and be introduced to all of our amazing panelists in a bit. So I want to take this time to just start the evening off by thanking everyone that has made tonight possible, all of our partners at the Wellness Collaborative, especially Karen and Jeanette and everyone at the Film Festival, Lisa and Allison, and of course the entire creative team and all the filmmakers behind At Your Cervix, especially Renee and Imagine. And of course, all of our incredible panelists are going to be taking the stage. Thank you for being here. And of course, all of you for coming out on a Wednesday night and supporting this film.
Welcome. We are so pleased that you're here. I am Dr. Karen Craddock, and I'm one of the co-founders, along with Drs. Callahan and Reed, of the Wellness Collaborative Incorporated. And we are an interdisciplinary collective, everyone from epidemiologists to entrepreneurs, urban farmers, and musicians. And together we know that the power of expressive arts and science really leads to pathways to wellness. And it is my deep pleasure, because about 3 years ago, Lisa and I, who are multi-generational Bostonians, we got to thinking, how can we work together in our organizations and really do a lot about linking wellness with film, which is why we're here tonight. We're also here at this intersection of Black History Month and Women's History Month, and I can't think of a better way or a better film to show tonight. But before we begin, we just wanted to also thank our partners. It has been absolutely great working here with James at the Museum of Science, incredible host. I want to thank Dr. Alana Stinson of New England Medical Association for co-sponsoring the screening. And we also just know that as long as we're giving thanks, right, to our partnerships, we'd be remiss if we didn't also acknowledge. So not only do we acknowledge our partnerships, but we are also honoring and giving sacred acknowledgement to the land that we are on, and the peoples whose lives stewarded here in profound ways of knowing and being, these my indigenous homelands of the Wampanoag Nation, the Nipmuc, and other indigenous relatives, noting the many sacrifices and strengths that came before us, and encouraging the ample opportunities for all of us to foster engagement and action with Native communities today throughout the state and the country. With that, I'll give it to Lisa.
Karen. Welcome, everyone. I just want to say thank you so much to James, and we felt the same way when we brought this program to James and said, is there any way that this may be possible? And Keith Mascoll and Roxann are very much a part of making that happen. So I just want to thank all of you. It takes a village, and I think that we are really excited. We had talked about this film for some time and how we were going to bring it here, and with Imagine and Renee, and I'm just so glad that we're at this place now. ROXFILM is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, which is really crazy and hard to believe. We are all about social impact, social justice, and really creating films that we use as a catalyst for conversation, which is why we're here tonight. And we have another series of films that are coming up in the next couple of months as well. So you can check out the website and see what you want to attend. And then the festival opens on June 20th and goes to the 28th. But we are really excited to have Imagine here, the director of At Your Cervix. This is her first feature film. She has been in the business of teaching sexuality for over 25 some odd years and has done a number of things, even a stage play, to really focus on these issues of women and consent. And so I'm going to bring her to the stage so you can tell you a little bit more about the film before it rolls. And then really, really looking forward to the conversation afterwards with this amazing panel that the Wellness Collaborative put together for you to have conversations with. So, and one other thing, we just found out that we did get the film Aftershock that we're going to be screening in May about maternal health, Black women and brown women maternal health. So we hope you'll join us for that as well.
One quick thing, I just want to make sure, Imagine, please come on out. We'll want to make sure we say this, and that is, again, at the Wellness Collaborative, we're very much about our care and our self-care. So certainly, as you're watching the film tonight, we want you to do everything to take care of yourself. So if you're starting to feel in any way triggered or uncomfortable, we encourage you to take a break. You can certainly go to the outside lobby. We are full in this house with folks that can actually support you if you just need to talk with someone. So we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that. Thank you so much, Imagine.
Thank you, Jeanette. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. So appreciate the Wellness Collaborative and ROXFILMs and the museum. This has just been such an incredible collaboration. We're grateful, so thank you. This film has been many, many years in the making. You don't need to ask us how many, just trust us, it's a lot. A lot of heart and soul, and really we stayed with it for this long because it's what we're talking about in the film is still so relevant. I wish that it were not. It is, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have afterwards. First, thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing from you afterwards, and I'll just let the film speak for itself. Enjoy.
I'm Robin Reed. I'm an internal medicine physician and a co-founder for the Wellness Collaborative, and thank you all for being here tonight. We have a wonderful panel who's going to get started, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I trained in the 80s, so you know I had that experience. When I did my GYN residency, we did do exams in the OR. It was specifically OR patients, GYN patients, but that was the way it was, and it was several people. We got indoctrinated and didn't think anything of it. And it wasn't until I was giving birth to my daughter and I was in the other end that I got to experience what that's like for patients. And I was asked, can we have medical students come in? And I said, oh yeah, sure. I know they have to learn. I thought it was going to be 2 or 3. It was like 8 to 10. And of course I was embarrassed. It really was something. I'm going to have each person tell a little bit about their background and share with us what popped out for them from this film, and from their perspective and their specialty, what they'd like to share with you. And we'll come back to Imagine in a minute.
Hi, I'm Roxann Mascoll. I'm a psychotherapist, a licensed clinical social worker, currently working at Harvard and Brandeis universities. But the work that I want to focus on after seeing this is my work with the Trigger Project as a lead clinician, where we're shattering the silence of Black and brown men who've experienced sexual trauma and nurturing their healing with the use of arts. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lucy Lomas. I'm an OBGYN physician and been in clinical practice for over 10 years. What really stood out for me was the deans asking that medical student, why do you identify so much with the patients? And that really spoke to me because I think it is so important for us just to break down the culture of hierarchical medicine. And it takes more time to create that even playing field and just more patient empowerment.
Hi, I'm Theresa Williamson. I'm a neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I'm an assistant professor of bioethics, specifically surgical ethics, at the Harvard Center for Bioethics, where I teach clinical ethics in general. And so obviously this comes right at the intersection of my work. I care a lot about how patients decide whether or not to go through with a procedure. So kind of this concept stands pretty much in exact sort of antagonistic to some of the principles that we try to promote. We actually had reviewed some of these things in the fellowship that I did in the University of Chicago in surgical ethics and putting this actually onto the consent form in Illinois. So I think it's amazing work, and I actually went to med school and learned public exams with GTAs.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here with us. It's an honor to get to share space with this incredible panel. My name is LyShyra Nolen, but everyone calls me Lash, and I am a 4th-year medical student at Harvard Medical School, and I'm also a public policy student at Harvard Kennedy School. And this is important to me because I think this topic is very much so at the intersection of both of those subjects. And I think what really stood out to me was just how so much of medical training is about, for me, it's been at least maintaining my humanity and being sure to resist against this indoctrination into what feels like a white supremacist culture, a culture of colonialization, especially as we think about our patients' bodies. And I think that that was definitely something that we saw in the documentary, thinking about the history of Marion Sims. So I'm excited to definitely get more into that subject and to break that down further.
Well, one of the questions that the audience asked is this still happening?
I wish I could say it's not. Yes, it's still happening. You heard about Ari's research, and so oftentimes people will say, well, that was 20 years ago, this still isn't a thing, which 20 years ago isn't actually that long ago. We've been working on this film for most of those years. But I told you I wasn't going to tell you how many. There was some research that came out in 2018 that was done in Northeastern medical schools that found that 92% of students reported doing exams on anesthetized patients where it was unclear whether they had consented. And my position is that if people on the care team don't know that patient is consented, there wasn't consent, because there's no reason why we would be hiding that and not making that process of consent and obtaining consent transparent. So that's more recent research, and I certainly can tell you just anecdotally, I've interviewed over 200 people over the years I've been working on this film personally. I've talked to students, I've talked to patients, I've talked to doctors, I've talked to legal experts, as you can see from the film. And I've heard many testimonies of this still happening. Some people, it was very hard for us to find the patient stories for this film. That actually was one of the reasons it did take a while. It took us a number of years to find the stories because most people don't know that this has happened to them for obvious reasons. The ones that do often don't want to talk about it, and certainly don't want to talk about it for a camera. So, it took us quite some time to just find the 3 stories that are in the documentary. There was a Hastings report that was done last year that asked patients whether non-consensual intimate exams had been done on them, and it was quite a large sample of patients, and 1.4% of them said that it had. So those are patients who knew that this had happened to them. So that doesn't count all the people it may have happened to who don't know. The other thing that was found in that Hastings report is that Black folks were 4 times more likely to report that. So this is another issue. I'm so glad to hear that you're bringing Aftershock. That's also a really excellent film that looks at racial disparities in healthcare. And this is another place where Black and brown people experience this far more. It is often people that are the most disenfranchised in healthcare that experience these kinds of things. And so this is a continued area of research that actually needs to be done. There is some research that's currently going on by some reputable bioethicists. And so we look forward to getting a sense of that. I hope the numbers go down. I want to see them go down. I want to see that this advocacy we've been doing matters as more and more people find out about this. And that's something we can also talk about tonight.
Yeah. And Roxann, share with us how many women have had bad sexual experiences and traumas?
Many. I mean, I primarily see people who experience trauma, racialized trauma, and it lives in the body. And we know that the body remembers the trauma. So even if, the consciousness or accessing memories is not there, we know that your body remembers this. And that was one of the things that I was thinking about the whole time, is that sometimes we do just sort of sense and feel something in our body at moments. And if you don't know that this is happening to you, there's no way to make these connections. And, there's still, in the mental health field, there's still these remnants of racism and hysteria. Thank you, Dr. Freud, for that word. But and just really women are still being treated in these ways. And I'm seeing it with men who are experiencing trauma as well, and sexual trauma, who don't feel like they can talk about this because they get so invalidated by the system. And so the system is not necessarily set up for men. And so that's sort of creating that dynamic. But imagine if we had as many women that are in here, we had as many men fighting for this. And that's one of the things that stood out in listening to, I think it's the governor in Utah. So we have to assume that every single person has experienced trauma. They don't need to tell you. Assume it and act accordingly. And that's what's so damaging about this for people who don't know what's happening to their bodies.
Yeah, definitely. And I was impressed that they were expanding the law to include men, that anytime anybody's private areas are going to be examined, that they were going to have consent for that. So that was very important. Well, what's going on with gynecologic education now? Has there been much change, or there?
I can certainly add that I also did my medical school and residency training in California, and I also did learn using GTAs. And even I knew I would go into OBGYN, and I feel like I only did exams on like a very small number of women, and it was with their consent, but because I was going into OBGYN, I did have that opportunity. And when I came to Massachusetts, that was in 2014, I did work with a colleague that worked with PA assistants, physician assistant students. And we did do a couple of exams under anesthesia. I'm certain that they were not consented. So that was as recent as, the past 5 years. And I'm certain now that in med schools, there are everyone has to have full consent, right?
Yeah, that is the expectation. So I did my clinical training at Cambridge Health Alliance, which is where Dr. Callahan works, and our program is a little different because it's a longitudinal model for our clinical training. So typically we do rotations in medical school where we're required to train for a couple of weeks or a month in obstetrics and gynecology, and then another set of 4 to 6 weeks in internal medicine and for all the major medical specialties. And what this does is it makes it so that you're kind of just thrown into these clinical situations, especially in obstetrics and gynecology, where you have no context or knowledge about the patient. So a patient could be delivering and then they say, oh, hey, can the medical student watch? And you have no understanding of the patient's background at times, and you're just kind of thrown into that event. But with my training, I was actually required to go to the pre-operation and the post-operation visit for each of the patients that I saw who were going into gynecological care. And my preceptor was very intentional about me having a relationship with the patient, so I had to go and personally get consent to do any type of exams that were going to be done under anesthesia. And also, while I was doing the exam, she made me speak out loud as if the patient were awake. So she would say, talk to the patient as if they were able to experience everything as if we were in clinic. So I think that I was very lucky to have that experience, but I definitely have heard of colleagues who have felt uncomfortable being thrown into these clinical situations. And I'm quite certain that these exams are still happening without complete patient consent under this umbrella that the medical student is a part of your care team, which can mean anything.
Yeah. Theresa, do you want to comment on that? Because I think there is this concept of if you're in a teaching hospital or if the student is part of the team, that you've given consent to everybody, everybody on that team and maybe others too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back a little bit to explaining just what consent is and what it isn't, right? Because, the informed consent is not actually the piece of paper. And so it's the conversation you have with the patient. In fact, you can very well, we like the bottom line of the commercial, and you're like, and also you could die, and also you could, if you've been consented, you know how it goes. And I actually usually joke with patients about that because I find it so ridiculous, right? To list off all of these possible things, because there's plenty of data to show that the conversation you're actually having with that patient, they didn't capture the vast majority of what you said. And so it's not really the form, it's the conversation that they are informed, meaning they understand the procedure, they understand what's likely to happen and what's not, and they're trusting you. I've actually had some colleagues call it kind of entrustment process. They're trusting that you're going to perform what you said you were going to do, and that you're going to, within the realm of, things that go wrong in the operating room, you're going to make the best decisions for them. But that actually only covers that perioperative event. It does not cover different exams or other things. Like you said, who's part of the care team for that particular procedure, but it doesn't cover, other procedures or things that you didn't know were going on. So for example, if I do a surgery and I really feel like, wow, this surgery is going to be way more involved than I thought. I found a tumor and I didn't know the patient had cancer. A lot of ethicists and surgical ethicists would support either waking the patient up to have another consent conversation, or stepping away from the OR and having a discussion with that patient's decision maker. And so I think that this idea that you could at all incorporate something like this into the consent process is just completely wrong and not ethical. It just sort of violates all our basic principles of autonomy and, non-maleficence, doing no harm.
It's interesting because somebody in the audience asked about two-way consent and having family members involved in consent too, and not just having a signature with all these words on a paper that you never really read.
And in medicine, you're so task-oriented and you're so hierarchical-oriented that it really, I didn't learn until I did a surgical ethics fellowship what it meant to have this two-way conversation and really have someone understand what they were going into. And so now my consent conversation is just so different compared to what it looked, including telling them who's going to be in the room. Like if I use a medical device rep, so-and-so is going to be there today. Just so you know, they don't help me do the surgery, but they're going to bring the instruments and they're going to see you while you're anesthetized and naked. And I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah, and you would think even if they had students involved in some things that would get documented in the procedures too, but frequently it doesn't. And so also then when people want to find out what happened to me, there's nothing there to say what happened.
It's typically not written in their charts, as you heard the nurse tell her story about that. And she knew how to look at the chart and how to look for that information. Most people would not know that.
People want to know a lot about GTAs.
All right.
What are they? How do you learn to become one? Are they used routinely now?
That's another area of research that it would be great to get some updates to see how many schools actually utilize gynecological teaching associates. So I don't have numbers on that. There is lots of research that shows it is the most efficacious way to teach, that the students who learn by GTAs have much more confidence with their patients, a wider breadth of skill after those sessions. The problem is that we get them as GTAs for 3 or 4 hours out of their entire rotation schedule, generally. I mean, there might be students that get a couple of sessions with a GTA. Sometimes we would go in and we would do, usually we'd work with second-year medical students, and then they would go into the rotations in their 3rd year, and then we might get them again when they're residents. But again, it's really only a matter of hours that we have them versus the big river of whatever is happening in medical school, in their rotations, in the clinical settings that they're working in. So oftentimes there are students that get both the GTA experience and then are asked to practice exams on anesthetized patients without consent. So there are oftentimes both experiences in the same programs.
Yeah, I also taught at a physician assistant program here in Boston, and they use GTAs, including men, for practice exams. And it's very helpful because the GTAs are also able to give us feedback on how the student was doing. And sometimes it was about them not connecting with the patient. They did the exam fine, but there was no connection and communication. So they're invaluable. They really are invaluable.
I think that's so important just with doing an OBGYN exam. Taking the time, sitting down and connecting and talking to the patient. There are so many times where patients tell me, oh my goodness, I have always had horrible experiences. I'm scared, I'm terrified. And, you know, I always just took my time, go slow, and if we got through the exam, great. And sometimes we didn't, and that was okay too. And just normalizing whatever their opinion is or normalizing their experience.
Actually, let me see if there's anybody in the audience who didn't want to write on the slip that wants to ask a question out loud. No? Okay, yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Part of my ignorance and naivete about this, but I was curious what is it that they're looking for if you're not an OBGYN, candidate, that you're such a strong bar for a psychiatrist? Why is it
Great question. Did everyone hear her?
Can you rephrase the question?
So why are they doing these exams if they're not there to look at treat a gynecologic problem? If it's not part of the care of the patient, why are they doing these? Why are they looking?
I think she was asking too, like if your specialty is not, like if, like I'm a neurosurgeon, I've never done a gynecologic exam in practice, and I probably never will. So like why would I ever be doing an exam under anesthesia, right? Right, like, or at all, yeah.
Yeah, and like the gentleman in the film, he had done like 180 exams and he was going into psychiatry.
Yeah. Exactly. I went into OBGYN and I did a very small handful of pelvic exams on women before I entered my residency training. Like literally like 5, maybe a few more, because I did a sub internship in my 4th year in medical school, but very, very few pelvic exams.
I think this is the next level of conversation that I want to have. Right now, we're working on getting laws passed in multiple states. The At Your Cervix team is currently working in 7 states, including Massachusetts, to get a law passed. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But we want to at least get this basic level of protection there in all 50 states. But really, the next level of the conversation is the pedagogical one, which is, why are we teaching this way? What is the benefit? I would pledge to you, there is actually absolutely no benefit to teaching students in this way. And in fact, it's detrimental, and I hope I've made that case. I hope we've made that case in the film. Because you're not teaching them a consent process, you're teaching them to disrespect patients, you're teaching them not to communicate well with patients. We're teaching, all of that hidden curriculum stuff that Ari brought up in the film. There is no benefit. If you are going to go into OBGYN and do pelvic exams on real, live, awake people, it's going to feel very, very different from what a very relaxed vagina would feel like. And so it's not even a good exam to teach someone how to do a good pelvic exam. And then obviously then there's all the other pieces of communication that you're not learning. You're not getting to practice that, which again is why we promote the GTA work and why it's so effective. The only benefit that I can see that would be there is that if there was some kind of pathology in the patient, that you would get to palpate that pathology. But again, that could be done while the patient's awake. It doesn't need to be done while they're asleep.
Yeah, devil's advocate is that in order to become competent, you have to do a certain number of examinations or procedures or whatever you're trying to learn. But is that at the medical school level? And I would say probably not. It's probably more when you decide your specialty that you need to do more and more of a particular thing.
They couldn't do this on cadavers. It has to be live people.
That's a great question.
I mean, it's a body, right? I mean, you could get permission. I mean, I wouldn't want you to do that to my loved one, but again, like some people devote their bodies to science.
No, absolutely. When I was in my residency training, we were very fortunate to have cadavers that we got to dissect during our anatomy lab. And what I do recall from the bodies that did still have their uteruses, they were very small. The vaginas were very small. So it would probably be easier just to find a model, like, you know, they have like the pelvic models to practice delivering babies and doing pelvic exams. I think that is good enough, certainly for the medical school education level.
Yeah, and I think we're also starting to see more virtual models that are being used for everything, whether it's surgery or exams. So, but we won't get off on that subject. We have time probably for 2 more questions, one from the audience, and then we'll come back to this one here about legislation in Massachusetts.
I mean, if we're talking about learning to do things, there are now simulations that medical students are learning from simulation, sort of like the way pilots learn, and they simulate actual current, actual live patient. That would be to the model rather than these things that's happening.
Yes, and that's what's going to advance more with AI. That should be able to provide even more feedback.
Can I just bring up one more point that we haven't talked about that I just want to make sure is out there? There's also something to be mindful of the mental wellness of the providers. Because, you know, like I don't want to equate anything, but, and this might be a poor example, but when we think about all the information we're getting around police brutality, there's a mental health component for the officers who are committing some of these, you know, this brutality. And it's there and we talk about it, but we didn't talk about that there's also, and I can see it in the faces, especially the student who you went back to see. You can see in her face that she's like, this is, I mean, it's wrong, isn't it?
She was really scared that she was hurting the GTA. And she said it. She said, I had a bad experience with a pelvic exam. Yeah. So she went into that exam with her own history and past.
But then when the follow-up, she still had the look on her face of wondering, did I say the right thing? And I'm sorry, that is not somebody who's really able to distinguish between what's happening for them in their own mental wellness and their caregiver. And I just want to bring that up because we didn't actually talk about that there's also that element. So thank you for that.
Good point. Thank you for adding that. Okay, the last question before we close out is, noticing that Massachusetts has not had any laws or bills passed, do you think Boston having these world-class teaching hospitals is a major drive in that? I had to read that exactly.
So we are working with your legislators to get a law passed here in Massachusetts, and we would love your help. That is really what this is going to require. So I'm not going to implicate anyone here, but I can say that when there is pushback for these laws, it generally comes from either the hospitals or the medical schools. Olivia Fry, who's doing the legislative work with me on the At Your Cervix team, she got a law passed in Connecticut, and it took her 4 years because Yale and physicians at Yale were very vocal about it. And I can say this publicly because they made it very public. They wrote New York Times op-eds. I was following the thing. We wrote an op-ed, and we didn't get that published in the New York Times. It was a well-written op-ed. So when you're talking about these institutions that have a lot of power, they can get the media behind them. They, oftentimes can, of course, heavily influence legislators. That makes it very hard. But they did, after 4 years, finally get that passed. So we are working with Senator Comerford and Rep. Dom here in Massachusetts. We actually had a meeting with them last week with a whole bunch of advocates and stakeholders. Robin was there. Karen was also at that meeting with us. And we're very encouraged by them. They are very much in support of not only getting these laws passed, but these bills passed, but also strengthening the bills. Unfortunately, we keep getting a hold of bills after they've been put forward, and they don't have all the things that we want in them. And so we are advocating for a stronger bill here than what has been put forward. They did change it before they put it forward to be for all intimate exams for people of all genders, which is number one very important thing that we're advocating for. We do know that these things happen to men, people with penises, prostate exams, rectal exams. That does happen. We don't have the same research and numbers on that, but we do know that that is also a thing. So we are also we just wrote a bill that we're very proud of. That is, I think, it is the strongest bill in the U.S. in the state of Colorado, and so it is in committee right now. It passed unanimously through the House committee, so a few weeks ago. So that feels, yes, thank you. That feels really exciting. So we would like to see that be a model bill. One of the things that that bill includes that no other bill includes yet is whistleblower protection. That is so, so important. You saw in the film, the people that have made change were students or residents who found a way to do something. Even Sean, after he did over 100 exams, felt very conflicted about that, went on to get a law passed in his state. He published articles about this in medical journals, so you saw Ari, that is where change has happened. And so we want to really support students to speak up if they see unethical things happening and to not participate. So we are partnering with the American Medical Student Association. They have been incredible as partners. We have a number of initiatives we're working on with them. And we need financial support to do all of this work. So that is a major thing. There are a number of other things that we want to see in the Massachusetts bill, including it should have to do with gynecology. This should not. We need to end this thing where there's an abdominal surgery or a knee surgery, and then there's lots of people in someone's vagina. Like, that needs to stop. So there's a number of details like that we are looking to include in the Massachusetts bill. We would love for you to join us. We're going to be tabling outside, and we can give you more information if you want to get involved with us. We're looking for advocates and stakeholders here, or just people that can rally your communities, because we are going to need to write letters. Number one, to get this heard early in the session if we want to get this passed. Number two, to testify when it gets to committee, and to ask for the additional things that we want in the bill. And we're going to lay that all out for people. We need people to testify. We need people to come forward. They were very clear that the more people they hear from, the easier it's going to be to get this in early and then to actually pass it in this session.
Contact your legislator. The bill number here in Massachusetts is 1383, the Senate bill. And I'm going to close out now. Thank you all for coming.
Wait. I just want to acknowledge Renee Bergen is in the back. She is the co-producer, the editor, the cinematographer on the film, my partner on the film. And is Judy here?
Thank you both.
Judy Mercedes is in the back, who's in the film. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Judy. I can't wait to talk to you outside. Thank you for all your work over all these years. Thank you all. Yeah, please contact your legislators and let them know that that you would like them to support the bill. So no matter what district you live in, the more supporters that we have, the more people that have already signed on, that is also going to be going to make it easier. So.
Can we take a panelist selfie where imagine you take this up in your hands and all the audience members?
Can we do that? Oh, I don't know if we could do that. But I did want to thank the panelists, and you can learn more about them and their work in the online brochure, the flyer, the program. So these fantastic women are doing great work.
And before that photo is taken, let's have one more hand for all of our panelists, including Robin. Thank you for moderating. Thank you for being here, sharing your insights, your experiences. It really was an honor for the museum to serve as a convening space for the screening of this film and for this dialogue. So thank you. A huge thank you to the Wellness Collaborative, the Roxbury International Film Festival, the At Your Cervix team, and a special thank you to Roxann Mascoll and Keith Mascoll of the Triggered Project. They played a huge part in connecting all of us today and making this happen. They are ongoing partners of ours here at the museum. They have their 4th live podcast taping of Living a Triggered Life podcast happening here in May. So make sure you find Roxann, find Keith, find me, grab your tickets. It always sells out. We are not done. We invite you to join us for a reception right out in the lobby. All of our guests and partner organizations will be out there. We want to talk to you, continue this conversation. You can figure out how you can continue this work and be a part of it. So make sure you stick around.